Hello, and welcome back to another video. So today we are going to have a bit more of an art and design discussion with the cards. We are going to be comparing some cards from these three decks along with the Rider-Waite-Smith deck and talk about the artwork, what we see in the artwork, how do certain things we see in the artwork bring forward the concept of the artwork, of the card meaning, or take us in a different direction. How can we take an abstract artwork and apply the idea of the Rider-Waite-Smith card meaning to that? I picked these three decks because they clearly have Rider-Waite-Smith influence. While not every card and every illustration is a clone or even references everything from the Rider-Waite-Smith, there are clear ties and they read to me like Rider-Waite-Smith. So I thought these would be a perfect example to do a little compare contrast to the artwork, and we can just talk about some art and design fundamentals of what we see in the cards. Now, what we are going to talk about is not necessarily the tarot card meanings. We are going to focus on the artwork and the illustrations and what that means to dissect these pieces of artwork to then think about the tarot. So if you're looking for the words to express things you like or don't like about artwork or illustrations in a tarot oracle deck, you may find this video extremely helpful as I walk through the cards and point out some of these art fundamentals, these design 101 things, or give you a new idea on how to look at the cards and the artwork. Sit back, hang with me, and let's look at a handful of cards and just see what the artwork has to show us and what we kind of can pick from that and what we want it to say. Let's start with the Magician, one of my favorite cards. So I think it's always great to look at the cards laid out here so we can compare. Like we did in the previous video, talking about the flow and cohesion of a deck ace through 10, it's also really great to compare different decks of the same card and lay them out against each other like this. So what I love what we're seeing here is that there are hints and throwbacks to the original artwork of the Rider-Waite-Smith. I love visually how all three cards look really great together, just, aesthetically and color-wise, and all of that looks really great. But the fact that they're referencing the same card, but giving us different emotions and giving us a different kind of framing or world. In the Apparition Tarot here, I absolutely adore that we start from a tin can. I love this about this deck. The artists use such mundane iconography or imagery in the artwork of this deck that speaks to me on such an artistic and conceptual level. So I love this idea that we can start from nothing. You can start from bottom of the barrel and build and create your world, your destination, your path, whatever that is. You can come from nothing and grow, harnessing these tools. It is really giving you the power. This is putting you in control. I love this tin can. This is really great in that we're surrounded by the symbols, the tools, the iconography of what you'll encounter in the rest of the deck. When we move to the Curious Travels Tarot, the interesting thing here is the figure down below is almost in this in-between. You get this sense of this person could kind of be like down on their luck and kind of trying to figure out what they're going to do. And if they were to just look up, they could see that the sky was opening and there's tools available to them. This could go in between of waiting to leap into inspiration or lack of finding inspiration, which is a really great angle for the Magician in the artwork here. We're still getting the sense of the garden. I like across all three, we're still getting this plant life, which references the garden of the roses and tarots in the original artwork. So we're still getting in that nature aspect, kind of this human and nature being one. Once again, like the pointing to the ground and pointing to the sky, the very grounded reality world we live in versus, what's out there, the spiritual, the metaphysical, that sort of untouchable kind of unsaid, right? So we're getting that sense in all of that. So what's interesting with the Amanita mushroom here as the Magician card You could really link that to a transformation, which the magician is leading us to with taking the power of the tools in our hands. So it's interesting to think of the transformation through a psychedelic mushroom. And it's also in this sort of bubble with a background, outer world, a kind of messy noise of that, and almost this protection bubble of you as magician, of you as taking kind of control and power to transform. So I like the mushroom representation. I also love the way the artwork shifts the mood, because this one is very stark. It's very kind of poppy and graphic and a bit modern, more loose in its illustration style. It feels a bit more artsy in its concept, in its presentation of its visuals, in terms of picking apart for what's the concept, you know, grasping the whole point of the concept here of the tin sprouting life, sprouting new growth, with the arms embracing that growth and grabbing onto the tools. The magician here certainly reads a bit more straightforward, although once again, this sort of in-between apathetic sort of looking figure skews me to, you know, feeling a bit more like down in the dumps, and like I could really use a boost of inspiration, which the magician would be perfect at. This is such an artsy, dark nature deck. I think if you weren't sure of what the mushroom is, maybe you would have a hard time coming to what this concept is representing. But I'm just trying to put myself into someone else's shoes as well, or a beginner's shoes, or someone who isn't as savvy with symbolism or meanings behind different plants and animals. So I'm always trying to take that into consideration as well. So I think this one might be the hardest one to grasp onto art-wise if you're unsure about the mushroom. The last thing I'll say, because I am intrigued by the sky and background design of this middle card here. I love the idea that these dark skies are either opening or closing to something brighter, which really does lean into what we discussed about the character or the figure here. You could go this way or you could go that way. I feel like this is definitely expressing a fork in the road. And depending if you grab for a tool or if you just keep walking forward, will depend on what the sky is going to do. Are we going to open up to the clear and bright and the warmth of the sun to move forward? Or is the dark, rainy, gloomy skies going to become wider and bring you down further? There's something really interesting to that. The Hierophant, I feel like this is one that people love to hate, or they just naturally feel uncomfortable or dislike. And I completely understand with the traditional religious imagery in the Rider-Waite-Smith and how that can transfer throughout other decks. However, I think what's really cool about these three examples here is that we really sort of leave that traditional religious structure behind, and we're leaning more into kind of higher self, you know, creature as deity and figure as elder. I like to think as the Hierophant as, you know, an elder, someone or something that's packed full of knowledge and experience that you are going to for guidance. And what I think is so cool about the Apparition Tarot, which it leans differently than these two do, is that this is very psychedelic. It's very outside of self. You know, it's almost acid trip-like. And I think that really speaks to higher self, especially with the eyes. We have the plant growth from the earth to the skies. This star pattern scroll that really speaks to like the cosmos, or, you know, just something being bigger than self is what I really get from this one. And the fact that we've got this really kind of trippy black hole, but there's these bright yellow sunbeams bursting from it, which makes it feel hopeful. It makes it feel like there's something positive going that way. It doesn't feel like something dark and dreary and dreadful. So this card, I think, is a really unique representation. And I think if you were just looking at the artwork trying to get a meaning, and not feeling the most confident in dissecting or interpreting artwork, I think I may struggle with this and its meaning. You know, it does feel acid trip, and maybe you could get something with that. But I think you'd really have to dissect, like, what's the scroll standing for? Yeah, I think this one would be hard. Where these two, I think you could understand that you were approaching this bigger than life person, creature, entity in search of answers, in search of guidance, you know, in search of something. So we can see that the Hierophant here in the RainShadow Tarot has an offering. There's also this hint to keys, which again is like unlocking wisdom, but also goes back into the original Rider-Waite-Smith with the double keys. So I love that nod. Looking at the Curious Travels one, we have the double columns of the Rider-Waite-Smith. So we can get this idea of if these two figures like pass through these double columns, like you're transitioning into that next phase, into that next chapter, which makes sense of walking up to this huge figure and seeking something. You could see that there is also an offering from this character as well. So I feel like these two definitely lean very heavy into a traditional sense of visual representation. And I think they are simpler to digest and understand having minimal knowledge, right? So I'm trying to balance all these aspects here, but I just really love how this is such a standout, unique execution of this card. The Hermit is one of my favorite cards, along with the Moon. So of course I figured let's talk about the Hermit, but I also like how these three are representing the Hermit in different ways. So what I love about this one here is we're really tapping into all of the senses. So we're really retreating all of our senses. We're really removed and focused on self. So I like this idea of almost sitting on this pedestal or this frame. Is this a mirror? Is this a picture frame that you are reflecting back into self? There is a tiny green fish down here. I'm going to say maybe that represents something like being a fish out of water. You're removing yourself. The fish is removed from water. It could in turn then speak to growth of removing self from said environment, said situation, and having that level of introspection on self. So that's an interesting thing you could dive into. Now, when we shift over to this artwork of the Hermit, I really adore how normally we would see the glow from the lantern if the lantern is included in the artwork, right? But here we're seeing this starburst in the figure's face or on its head. And what I really love about that is that's really speaking to self, to introspection, to going within, to find the light within, to shine out. And I like that idea of this representing like the North Star of going into self, of removing self from whatever distractions, you know the whole spiel. The removal, but we're still up here, which is the whole point. Very dark, very moody, but something is so cool about this gold star. It really lands on the execution for the Hermit, and you sit and stop and think about what that could represent. It's also cool how we're getting the light feature across all three, in all three very different ways. Once again, hearkening back to the original Hermit's light in the lantern. Love that. And then here, well, this one feels very senses. This is very like mind, intellect, going inside the brain. You know, this here is really a physical feeling, a really physical representation of leaving, of the separation. Small in scale, right? Like we can see that this figure on this boat is deep out into the water. Small itty bitty. We have the darkness of the clouds, but the bright light shining from that lantern. So you could think about beating those clouds away or fighting through the darkness, pushing through the darkness. You know, what's that light going to shed upon? And then also we have this red dashed circle around the figure, almost like a protection barrier. it's a different way of showing what the original Hermit represents. I just like how this is so sensitive. This is such a heavy, like, feel, sense, full body experience. This is a very like mind, brain, intellect, very swords, right? Sort of representation and experience. And then here is such a physical removal. Really cool. The Four of Cups for me is very like blasé, like very right? And I feel like that's so relatable. It's like such the moodiest, like I'm feeling meh sort of representation. And so what I really like is we're getting that emotion from all three of these artwork, right? What I like seeing about this line drawing of this face is you really get that sense of emotion. I mean, you can just read it on the face. And then the fact that we have the three cups going upside down, almost like they're dumping onto the figure, that's feeling so blah. That we have this golden chalice here with, I don't know, golden butterflies flying out of it. And how the figure traditionally represented here is completely ignoring and passive to all this goodness that's happening here and letting the three cups just dump on them. So I think this is a really cool representation of that. I think that's a very clear sense of, you know, the indifference here is really showcased with just the artwork being in the black and white, just the black line drawings, right? We have the couple little bit of color hints here in those cups to still be like, hey, these are still things going on. You know, it's not a complete write-off versus like the full color of this golden one over here, right? But just seeing how the artwork coloring really separates those two concepts, those two halves. You can see how color and no color can really extend that idea visually. This one's really interesting because the figure does look like they're having a good time. They're kicked back in the chair, obviously at some establishment. They're being offering a fourth cocktail. They have a cigar. You know, they're hanging back. It looks very cozy setting. While this one shows a lot more of that sort of heavier emotion, this one is showing a bit more of that, what I call a bad attitude. Okay. Right? Like this one is feeling a bit ungrateful of like, look at this, you're being offered this good thing and you're just completely ignoring it. You already have all these other things. Why would you care for that? You know, it's feeling a little bit snobby almost, right? And I don't know if the guidebook talks about it. This is just what I'm reading from the artwork, right? So that one's interesting where this one definitely feels like, relatable. Like I just feel like this one's such life, right? Like it's just like, yeah, I've been there. And this one, while visually represented in a way that I can't necessarily connect to, but I can connect to the concept of what this environment, of what this idea is, right? When we shift over to this third card here, now what's interesting is we're seeing two people. So we're really getting that relationship angle of the cups in this artwork versus just the single figures here. I guess we have a little bit of a nod to the hand, but I believe that's a bit of a nod to the hand in the original artwork, right? Less so representing about that sort of relationship aspect of it, where this one does feel very more relationship based. What's also really interesting is these cups here. Now, are they coming down to land and stack, or are they flying out of the scene because this figure seems to be walking away? I also really like the idea of how many natural resources are available in this artwork, in this scene as well. While yes, the tree is down to its stump, but what can bark be used for? What could a whole trunk be used for? We have the water, the land, the mountain range here. Like it feels like all these resources are at your fingertips and you're choosing to walk away, or you're choosing to put your nose in a book and like look out. You know what I mean? Like there's such little things you could pick out of this one if you really wanted to do that. Now, I think that's interesting how all three have a slightly different take on the Rider-Waite-Smith traditional artwork and meaning. Okay, the standard 3 is swords, so we are getting the 2 hearts with 3 stabs. Obviously, this center one is very, very closely represented to the original artwork here. So we'll just kind of skip over that one and let's talk about the smaller heart with the Three of Swords here. It almost feels like a tattoo, but what I find more interesting is this maze-like illustration behind with the two figures and the three drops here. The idea of being lost, looking for self, trying to understand the heartbreak, feeling lost because of the heartbreak. You really get this sense of the ouch and the journey of trying to figure it out. You know, that feeling lost, like, is this a shadow of this person or is it two people? Looking closer, it kind of looks like a shadow, which is even better, I think, with the artwork and the concept of the card and the idea of losing yourself. I definitely think of the Three of Swords of more a reflection of self. And look at all the different ways that the openings of the portals are facing. I mean, that's such life, right? It's such up and down, squiggles around, 2-step forward, 3-step back. Like, that's what this is feeling like. And then switching over to a much more abstract representation in the artwork here. But you still get this sense of piercing, right? So we have a central shape and we've got these elements coming in and piercing. You can tell this is shooting through this like crescent shape here to laser into this circle in the center. And you can see the shadows and the prick points of these sharp edge. This is just shapes, right? But you can get this sense of movement, of action, of emotion. Like we have the reds and the pinks, which feels very energy, right? Like we think of red as like a warning or something like emergency based, or like red, like passion or anger. Just applying that sense of color to the shapes of that force, to that piercing force. I think you could definitely read very similar to this representation visually. What I also really like is that we're getting this almost like halo protection around the circle here that is being punctured. But then it also has this dotted, almost double stream coming off of that. Now, could you say, is that energy going to, or is that energy being released? You know, you could say this upside down arc and this fine pointed arc here is almost like a radar, like a scope, you know, like lining up the shot here. So it certainly just feels like a painful card, I think, even though we're not getting a literal image. So I think that's an awesome representation. This one is definitely my favorite. I love this idea. Like, this clearly represents a portion of the Three of Swords to me, for sure. One of my favorite cards in the minors is the Nine of Pentacles. And I just love how rich and luscious and luxe and how fashionable and just the pure sense of like richness this card oozes. And what I love about this representation in the artwork here is how it puts a spotlight on the figure of their successes. And then here's kind of their like earthly goods, rewards, what the hard work has granted them, right? This black background with this white spotlight circle, I think is such a brilliant use to represent that sort of recognition, right? Like this feels very recognized of your success, of your talents, your skills, your hard work, your time, your energy, your like everything is just like the ultimate glory, the ultimate like, whoa, like, you know what I mean? Like, I love that. And then how we're just using the symbols here of the pentacles to round out the composition. I think it mimics a flower nicely, which kind of balances and creates this nice diagonal through the composition. And then we have the classic grapes represented here, which you can see here in the bushes on the original Rider-Waite-Smith, which we could see here in the dress of this lovely figure in purple hat. This one, we're definitely getting a lot more Pentacles vibe with the landscape and the house behind. Really get a sense of that reward of the hard work, of those material and physical goods. And of course, the grape dress is just too fabulous. This one is really giving us that similar sense, but in a different visual form. We're getting this burst, this central composition here of these really bright and rich and vibrant colors together that are melting into one another. It's almost creating a sphere-like home, you know? You could say this is an abstract type of home. And I think it's interesting how the figure is almost longing or looking to the future again. It's like, okay, I got here, but now what? What's the next step? Like, I have this glorious world, this bubble, this home, this land, this life that's really great. See, we're getting these pops of the bright colors, which really brings in this sort of idea of like positivity, of excitement, of celebration, of like something good, right? Like it gives off like something positive. And then this is almost looking like a moth or a butterfly shape. So you could really talk about like transformation, which speaks to the way the figure is kind of looking ahead and looking forward. So that would make sense. And then I like this idea of these watercolor kind of drips and splotches. Not that it's breaking into this beautiful, vibrant world that's been crafted and worked hard for, but that darkness does creep in. The cycle does restart, right? So while this is good, beware, because we all start back to the bottom once again. So that's an interesting way to look at that. And I think it's a bit of an outlier for these ones, although it's interesting we're getting like these kind of double spotlight shapes. But also the window is kind of interesting, kind of a spotlight portal shape as well. Lots of circles, but I guess it makes sense for the suit, pentacles, mimicking the circular shape in the artwork does make sense just for a theme, a nice little Easter egg, a nice little hint of like, yes, I thought about it, right? So I think this one is the more unique one out of the bunch. But I think they all do a great job representing the card, and it really just depends on how you want to break down the artwork as well, and how you interpret the artwork, how you see the colors and shapes and composition and the figures and the way it's drawn to make your meaning, to make your conceptual connection, right? And of course, because animals, I love that we're still getting a hint at the hawk here as a wee little bird in the spotlight on this one. I think that's very cute. Hopefully this very brief art discussion across these few decks, looking at the same cards and picking apart the artwork a little bit, helps you look at tarot artwork in a more foundational and art and design driven way. Really think about the colors, the composition, the imagery and symbolism used. You know, we could peek about, ooh, what do these little crescent moons mean? Or are these not crescent moons? And it's more of an expression of listening, which is interesting, holding the hand up to the ear. And now I don't know if there's anything with owls and sound. I don't know off the top of my head. I feel like probably yes. You know, so like pull apart the artwork like that. Think about the scale. Look at how small this figure is in this big, vast ocean, which represents that whole discussion of removing self, of isolating self, of stepping back. It's very physical, very earthly representation of that removal. Pick apart, how does color versus just black and white play out? Do you feel something different when you see that? You know, how can something a bit abstract really direct you in a meaning through the artwork? Really sit with the images and the symbolism that you see, especially, you know, when you're not just looking for a quick hit, right? Like I know you just want a quick hit and get moving on, then, you know, this sort of practice wouldn't be something you do in that moment. But when you want to sit with the cards, sit with your reading, really get something more from it, and especially as just an art 101 design foundation way, start to pick apart what you're seeing. Think about, what are you feeling? Is it something positive? And what's that positive reaction to? Is it the colors? Is it a facial expression? Is it an animal? Is it an object? Is it just the way the artwork as a whole is representing the concept of the card's meaning? Or if you're having a negative reaction or something that's physically like recoiling, you know, like what is that? What exactly is it? Is it a darkness to the card? Is it Some people have a problem with faces and the way those are drawn. Is it something that's hitting on a tender or sensitive subject or area for you, and you're just kind of having that physical reaction, and it's not necessarily the artwork itself? You know, like there's things to kind of think about that. You could just journal on that itself. You could certainly do a read and not even like want to include a divination or like self-reflection layer to it, and you just wanted to break down the artwork and try to understand a deck or a card on a deeper level or more clear level of why the artwork is the way it is, I think it's a perfect journaling prompt. I think it's a great way to sit and work with a deck, to bond with a deck, to get to know a deck better, and also just to be an educated consumer. You know, we all see a deck and we see a few cards and we're instantly like in love and we buy it or whatever. And sometimes those work out, but sometimes the other cards in the deck don't feel like they sit right. Like, you know, when you listen to an album, right, of your favorite band or a band you really like, and you get through a few songs and then you hit a song, you're like, oh, I do not like this. Well, like, why is that? What is that reaction? So it's the same way with our tarot and oracle decks, right? So let me know if you found this quick little run through helpful. I try to keep these as straightforward and as few points to jump around as possible, so we can really kind of streamline a few main concepts and then move on to a video in the future that will expand upon other concepts or expand upon what we've talked about in a more granular or in-depth way, right? So I'm just trying to set up our foundations and things that we see but maybe can't put words to for now. So if this was helpful, please do let me know in the comments below. I know in my last video, many of you were thrilled on the art and design discussion, so I will continue to bring these to you. Of course, I've got to throw in my fun, like, here's a bunch of decks, let's look at them, or here's some pairings I'm loving, let's look at them, because that's very enjoyable to me as well and is a part of my practice. So I will definitely be interweaving this topic amongst my other videos as well. So do let me know. The feedback in the comments is definitely important. And if you're liking what I do, please make sure to subscribe. It lets YouTube know that you're into my channel and maybe others will be into it as well. So thank you so much for being here with me, and I will catch you on the next one. Bye.